welcome to the BESTMIX Podcast. I'm your host, I'm Lynn Verstrepen, and I'm excited to have you joining us today. Each month, we do a deep dive in the world of feed and food production. And whether you're now a quality manager or a formulator, a CEO, an IT manager, or another stakeholder in the nutrition industry, this podcast is for you. And today we are excited because, of course, my colleague Karel Vervaet is also joining this podcast today. And we are excited to bring you an insightful conversation. I hope to have an insightful conversation with Irene. We will share her expertise on sustainability today. So maybe, Irene, you can introduce yourself because for our listeners, you're new to this podcast.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Karel, for having me. So I will just introduce myself. So my name is Irene, and I've been an LCA practitioner for 8 years now, and currently my position is the Chief Science and Product Officer of Opteinics. And Opteinics is an environmental footprinting software as a service platform. So as I said, thank you for having me and looking forward to our discussion.
We as well. So we mentioned already briefly sustainability. That will be the topic of today. And maybe, sustainability is, of course, a lot of things. If I think of sustainability, then I think of the environmental impact side of sustainability, like sustainable practices to conserve more water, soil, and energy, but also biodiversity plays a role there. Also climate change mitigation, that's also a big topic in this area. For me, sustainability is much more than environmental impact. You also have health and well-being and social responsibilities. But for this podcast, we will focus more on the environmental impact side of the sustainability. And what we would like to do is talk first a bit about trends that we see in this area. And maybe one of the things that we noticed as a company, as BESTMIX Software, is that if you look to the environmental impact side, you have regulations, and regulations are often different between countries. For example, between US and Europe, you have differences. And Irene, could you share maybe, first of all, these regulations, why are they important? And what are then biggest differences? And why is it important for companies to understand these differences?
Yes, thanks, Lynn, for the question. So you very well mentioned that there are differences between Europe and the US, right? So that's very important to differentiate because in the US, it's actually so climate change or environmental impact that's very much driven by politics, which should not be the case, but depending on the administration, the regulations will actually be stronger or softer. And luckily, so with the current administration, there were some advancement in this area, like for example, the Inflation Reduction Act. So they right now have a large investment for technologies, more looking at the electrification or renewable energy in the US. So they are aware of their emissions. So they are the second most polluting country in the world. And they plan to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by, I think right now they say it's around 50% by 2035. Yeah, so there are some policies in place, which is good. And then when we look at Europe, Europe is well heavily regulated, and we have this umbrella, let's say, regulation term, which is called the Green Deal. So under this Green Deal, there are many individual standards or regulations that will make companies or are already making companies like strict regulations where they need to comply, they need to report. Like one prominent is the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So we will go more into detail in a few minutes, but that's heavily driving the reporting of the environmental impact in Europe, with the goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. Yeah, so Europe says, okay, all companies need to be carbon neutral, but they don't really say how, right? It's like, so then the message here is like any step also, going towards reducing the environmental impact is in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. And Karel, I know you did already a lot of presentations about sustainability, I think both in US and Europe. Do you also see those differences, or do you receive other questions around this?
Well, what you see in Europe when you give presentations to European customers, prospects that are, let's say, that are interested in sustainability, you very often see that that their question and the things they want to do is indeed driven by this Green Deal and other initiatives where they really have a strong focus on reducing their environmental impact with a really defined goal. Whereas if you talk to customers or prospects in the US, that you indeed see that it's more on a voluntary base today, and that people are preparing themselves because, yeah, as you know, the administration is going to change or let's say, well, there is a potential that is going to change in the US. So that might change the directives, that might change the initiative. And I think that yeah, companies in the US are more in let's say in a preparation mode in getting themselves ready to be able to anticipate to change in policy or to, let's say, to continuation of the policy, where in Europe you see that the policy is ongoing and people really need to start acting. So I think that how you say, that complements very well what Irene is saying. And I think that's also, let's say, I would say the stage where Europe was in about 5 years ago. That's more or less the stage where I see US-based customers in at this moment. Without judging, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's not, but that's what you see.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And Irene, you mentioned it's always a long name and these abbreviations, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Can you maybe explain a bit more what is this? Because I can imagine not for everybody, this is always very clear. It's also very not easy topic to understand, I can imagine.
Yes, sure. So this CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, so that's basically the directive that will require companies to report on their, well, among other sustainability topics, like you mentioned, Lynn, is not only in the environmental impact, right? But when we look at climate change, in greenhouse gases emissions, so this directive will require that companies report their emissions. So this is new. I mean, for a few customers, I mean, for a few companies, but so just to give you the perspective, so until now there were 15,000 companies in Europe that were already reporting their emissions, but now with this new directive, this number of companies will go up to 50,000 companies. So this will have an impact on those companies because suddenly they are asked by Europe to report on their emissions, and they don't give a guideline, right? So it's like just like report, just you need to report. I mean, this is not also like all companies need to report as of today. So this directive has a staggered approach. And maybe when we look at the food companies, which is a bit where the feed is also going, food companies, for example, will need to report their emissions by 2026, which means that by 2025 they will be asked by Europe, like, be prepared because you will need to report the emissions. And I mean, this is affecting companies. I mean, there are, well, a lot of requirements that the audience can check. But one of the requirements is that the companies, they need to be less than 250 employees. There is also a threshold for the revenue. So of course, all the micro companies, they will not need to do it, not yet. And the thing, is that this is not only affecting European companies, but also third-party companies, which means that companies that have activities, branches, or subsidiaries in Europe, they will also need to report. So they will also be part of this directive. which means that a US company selling their products in Europe, they will fall into this regulation.
Yeah.
And for our audience, which is of course, Irene, which is quite, let's say, in the supply chain of the food, we have multiple players in the supply chain. Does this mean that this applies to every player in the supply chain, or does this apply only to, let's say, the consumer-oriented customers? If you're getting where I'm trying to be, will this apply to farmers, or does this apply to the companies that, let's say, put the products of the agro industry on the shelves?
Right. So that will apply more to the downstream value chain, right? Because that's well, where they will sell the product. So, I mean, the way it works, right, currently is that, I mean, companies, more the downstream companies, they will approach this reporting with having a corporate, for example, a corporate carbon footprint. And by doing that, they will mainly use for their value chain, right? Let's say like you are a big integrator, for example, and you have thousands of farms that are providing the milk, for example, or the pig meat to your company. So these farmers, right, this upstream value chain, right now, well, their customers, they are using generic secondary data, what's called a generic emission factor. So per liter of milk or per kilo of pork meat, I will assign an emission factor to that. But the next step, of course, is that, okay, if I'm the company, I will pinpoint my suppliers, like, okay, these are my top emitters. And then I will go to my suppliers, right, to the farmers, and eventually to the feed mills, to ask for those emission factors with their production data. Yeah, so basically what we are seeing now is that it's also driven by downstream companies, right? So all this reporting is more the downstream. So the big companies with the big revenues, they are the ones who need to report.
Yeah.
But this pressure, right, it will go to the chain. Well, I mean, I was working at BSF, so we are completely upstream. You know, we are the last one in the chain, and we get requests. We get a lot of requests, so it's an increasing demand for carbon footprint, especially for our products. So it's a chain, right, of requests for these emission factors, basically, for this sustainability reporting.
Yeah.
Okay. So in fact, you're saying the reporting, let's say the reporting obligation or the reporting initiative goes mainly downstream, but in fact, because downstream does not contain or does not have all the figures, they will, let's say, extend that pressure upstream all the way up. So in fact, every player in the chain will need to take up its responsibility in trying to, let's say, define their role in this sustainability reporting directive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. All right.
Maybe this is also a nice bridge towards more science-based targets and Scope 3 targets for suppliers. What's the relationship, or what's then, how do you see then the link between that directive and this?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yeah, because you have, or I mean, you see in this SBTI, so the Science Based Target Initiative. So in the website, I like it because they put basically the companies, that are committing to the targets, and it's just increasing every year, year by year. I think now they have around 4,000 companies. So this is a voluntary, let's say, reporting measurement. So this SBTI, that was an initiative that was initiated by organizations like WWF, the World Research Institute, CDP, and after the Paris Agreement in 2015, they decided that it's necessary to have validated emissions reduction targets, which means that so far, these emission reduction targets, that was, as I said, a voluntary thing. So companies were voluntarily committed to science-based targets, and then they were reporting to this SBTI, and they were validating the targets with the latest climate science. So they were saying like, okay, to commit to a world where the temperature will not increase more than 1.5 degrees, then you need to reduce your scope 3 by X%. You need to reduce your scope 1, 2 by X%. Yeah. So this is, and then of course the way this linked, to for example, this corporate sustainability reporting directive. So they always try to align, right? They always try to complement each other. And at the end, there will be like a common, let's say, target. Yeah. So everyone aiming at carbon neutrality 2050. But I mean, this SBTI that's currently mainly driven, as we mentioned before, mainly driven by downstream companies. Right. You see all the consumer products, like if you go to the supermarket, basically most of the retailers, most of the food brands, they have committed publicly to such targets, right? And then what they will require as well at some point is that all their suppliers, they will also have to commit to SBTI. So as I said, right now they use generic emissions, right, for the value chain, but they will also request that the suppliers commit to reduce their emissions.
Yeah, I think that's also what you see today already. Yeah? I mean, there are a couple of examples also here in Belgium where let's say these scope 3 targets that retail sets really drives feed companies and also becoming more knowledgeable and also becoming and also defining what you say, instead of setting up their generic emissions, and really trying to get a grip and trying to really calculate environmental impact of the products they deliver to the supply chain in a more science-based way, to be able to get to those scope 3 targets that are set by the downstream players in the supply chain. I think even more than politics, I think the decisions that the downstream organizations take will have a bigger impact on the upstream than the real politics. And of course, it will be the, let's say, the incentive of politics, I think, will be to really influence the downstream, because if you can't get the downstream to comply to the targets that you define, it's going to be hard to also, let's say, get let's say commitment from the upstream companies to comply to these targets.
Yeah, true. Yeah, downstream, of course, the retailer can easily put pressure if they want to achieve something and you still want to deliver your products. But when we are talking about politics or another way of forcing something, I'm thinking then of carbon taxes. What's your view on that, Irene? Because that's also a kind of method of trying to push something.
Definitely. So, I mean, at the end, right, businesses or operations, they are driven by costs.
Yeah.
So, actually, there was the first country in Europe, Denmark, that was released recently, actually, in the news in June, and they basically want to put a carbon tax on carbon emissions from agriculture from 2030 on. I mean, it still needs to be approved by the Danish Parliament in August. But what they want to do is that every farmer will pay a tax per kilo CO2 that they emit. So, which means that the more you emit, so the less
Mhm.
sustainable practices you have, the more you have to pay. So this is it's not an incentive, right? Well, it's kind of like an incentive, right? Because then you want to
Mhm.
reduce your emissions, so
Yeah.
so that you pay
Yeah.
less taxes, which at the end that's what hurts the most, yeah, for every
True.
company, basically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these carbon taxes, or I mean, this carbon pricing, that's not something new. So in Europe, we have the ETS, so the European Trading System, that trades with carbon
Yeah.
allowances for other
Mhm.
industries, right? But when
Yeah.
we
Mm-hmm.
look at food, for example, or
Yeah.
agriculture, that was mainly driven by the voluntary carbon market, right?
Mhm.
So you have all these practices like regenerative agriculture and so on, where you can claim or you can basically sell the carbon that you sequestered with your practices. And now with this carbon pricing, so I think that's I mean, in my personal opinion, that's one basically good way forward. Yeah. So I mean, there are two aspects, right? So one is like who should pay for that?
Yeah.
You know, is it who in the value chain? Is it the consumer? Is it the upstream, downstream? So that's the key question. And then there are other companies, like, for example, Lufthansa, completely different industry, but they want to. Well, the aviation also has their sustainability targets, and they need to include the SAF, so sustainable aviation fuels. They have their targets, but they want to put the extra, let's say, costs of using those fuels on the consumer.
Yeah.
So when
Mhm.
you pay your flight ticket, you will have an
Yeah.
extra cost for these aviation fuels,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is like, I mean, at the end, the consumer will pay for everything, right? So the cost at the end
Yeah.
actually doesn't really matter who will pay, but we will then pay for
Mhm.
everything. But at least they are saying it openly, right? It's like, hey, okay, we put an extra cost in the ticket, which I would also agree, So I know that the environmental impact is not a, let's say, a driver right now for consumers, yeah, to make a decision. So
Mhm.
Money always is.
um,
Yeah.
it's still money. So of course, environmental impact, that's in the new generations, of course, that's a huge
Mhm.
topic. But overall, globally, or well, when we look at Europe and the US, it's costs and more the ethical practices, right? When we look at
Mhm.
food or animal products.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would have maybe in your product, in your supermarket, like a tax, like a CO2 tax, it's like, okay, for this chicken meat, you pay whatever, 50 cents. And for this chicken meat, you pay 20 cents. It's like, okay, I see that the impact is already,
Yeah.
less or worse. So at least to have the transparency, right, for
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
consumer,
True.
um, that
But
could
still, I
that could
think it's
help.
not an easy step or an easy thing that we are walking into because, Karel, I don't know if you remember last year we went to Wageningen University and there we got an explanation that a company decided to optimize their packaging because of sustainability reasons. And they noticed, okay, the design was more sustainable and in fact, globally, it would be better to do it like that, but they saw a drop in their sales because the consumer didn't appreciate the packaging because it's a bit less user friendly, let's say. And yeah, I think you can then still make it transparent that it's more sustainable, but we still as a consumer are not yet willing to give up certain luxury that we are used to, so that's also still a change I think we need to go into. And that will not be easy because you can't have it all. You can't have everything that we
No,
had before and then the steps that we want to make on this topic.
no, correct. Plus, yeah, I think also everybody is always talking about carbon
Yeah.
and climate change. So it's always about, and I think it's important. Global warming is is
Yeah,
a
sure.
is an important topic to address. But yeah, as a yeah, I'm an environmental engineer by education. So my worry is then always, yeah, I mean, we're focusing on carbon where, yeah, if you and we always talk about environmental footprint, but in
Mm-hmm.
fact the topic or the discussion today always is about carbon. And I think, and I hope I'm mistaken, but I think by focusing on carbon, we're kind of ignoring a lot of important other factors of the environment, like water usage or land usage or maybe ozone or I don't know what. What is your thought on that, Irene?
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point. And so I am so in Opteinics, our software, we not only show carbon but all the environmental indicators. And I always make sure that customers, I mean, it's a very difficult topic, right? When you start explaining this environmental footprint assessment, when you say like, oh, carbon is not the only thing, I can show you more. And then customers are like, so what? I just need to report on carbon.
Yeah.
So I always try to make sure that, okay, we have it in the software, we show it,
Mm-hmm.
we show our customers that that's very important. And for me personally, so I come from Spain, from the southeast of Spain, and I have seen the environmental degradation of the place where I used to spend my summers. So that was like a salty lagoon from the Mediterranean Sea that it's formed, and that's surrounded by agriculture. So agriculture like crops, and farms, especially pig farms. And this lagoon, so like when I was like 10 years old, there were seahorses, like
Yeah.
clean waters. Today you cannot go to the water. It's so
Oh.
eutrophicated. Um, if you stand there, it's like quicksand. Um, because of the unsustainable agricultural practices,
Mm-hmm.
uh, some illegal practices, like pumping the water from underground that they were not allowed, dumping all the waste, using excessive fertilizers, pesticides. So all these phosphorus, nitrogen emissions to the water. So for me personally, it's like, okay, carbon is not the topic I would look at. If I was in my
Yeah.
region, I would look at phosphorus, nitrogen emissions, and water, of course, depletion. So we have, so in my region, it rains, I don't know, a few days a
Yeah.
year.
Mm-hmm.
So water scarcity, it's such a topic, a more important topic than carbon. I mean, in general, carbon, that's a good indicator about your supply chain, right? So the more carbon you emit,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this means that
It's a trend.
normally that,
Yeah.
right, for the other impact categories should be the trend. But of course, when we look at agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
that's normally not the trend. Yeah, so having less carbon emissions, maybe it means that you have more biomass, so you consume more water, or you emit more nitrogen and phosphorus, right, from the
Yeah.
fertilizers, right? Yeah.
Okay.
If you look to this, it sounds very difficult then for a company how to act and to be able to go towards more sustainability or a better environmental impact. So maybe a good question now is how can companies act and how does this start then? Can you explain what then the first fundamentals are in doing this?
Right. Yeah. So, the first step, so the thing is that companies, they need metrics,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when they want to measure the environmental impact, they need metrics. And for that, they need the data. And companies have the data. So they know how much, normally in their ERP systems, for example, they know how much they buy from what raw materials, sometimes even from what regions, what countries. They know how much energy they need. They know how much water they consume, um, how their employees commute. So all this data is available in the companies, right? So they just need to make basically the structured data out of this unorganized or
Yeah.
unstructured data. So I think that's the first step, right? To really put the data in order, because every year, right, they will need to recalculate, let's say, all this reporting. But it's not right that it's coming out of nowhere, or they don't have it. It's like it's there. They just need to organize the data. That takes quite some time. I mean, especially if you are a big company. Right now, if you look at the open job positions, right, you see sustainability positions everywhere.
Yeah, I can imagine. Mm-hmm.
So that's like that's not going away, right? So that's something that eventually will be also AI doing it probably, but right now, because it's pretty new, so you see
Mm-hmm.
sustainability positions, they are restructuring all the teams to have resources. You need human
Yeah.
resources. So that's also something that we see, like, okay, maybe someone having two jobs is like, okay, then sustainability comes on top,
Yeah.
and they are overwhelmed. It's like,
I can
okay,
imagine.
where do I start? Because there are
Mm-hmm.
so many regulations depending on the sector where you are. So having resources dedicated to that, because it's a differentiator
Yeah.
at the end. If you
Yeah.
don't have it, it will be a license to operate.
Yeah. Indeed.
It's like you said, it's not going away. It's gonna keep being put on everybody's agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, until we reach a goal where, let's say, as a society, or as all of us together, where we are satisfied with the outcome. So yeah, indeed, I don't think this is something that will keep us occupied for quite a while still.
Mm.
Right.
And if I think we both work in software, so we do see a benefit of having software supporting this, because indeed it's a lot of work. But if you then look to LCA and the data and how you're dealing with that information, what is for you then the most important thing where software can help in this area?
Yes. So I mean, as I said, I'm an LCA practitioner myself, and I mean, doing an LCA, a life cycle assessment, that can be very challenging. So that's very time consuming. That's normally expensive. That you need experts to do these LCAs. So what we have done now with our software is basically to simplify this LCA process. So we have, for example, we have a product which is to calculate the LCA of chicken meat. So from all the LCA standards, we have identified what parameters you need to enter there. And as I said, all the companies have the data, right? But they don't know what data they need maybe for an LCA. So we make that easier for the companies so that they can enter the data in our software and have the LCA according to all the standards. And again, LCA alone, right? It's the environmental impact. So I think that's I mean, that alone is like, that tells you a lot of information. It's like, where are the hotspot of my
Mm-hmm.
value chain? What can I improve, right? But then our customers sometimes they want more, right? So when we look at feed formulators, for example, it's like, okay, I need to calculate the environmental impact of my product, but I already use many other software like BESTMIX, right, to optimize my feed for costs and nutrition. So it's like, okay, we make it easier for the customers with software integrations. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that's also the way forward, that
Mm-hmm.
not having many software for different, I mean, to answer different questions, right?
Yeah.
But try to make it easier for them as well. So now having Opteinics integrated with BESTMIX, they can optimize, and if they want, they can click and have the
Mm-hmm.
environmental impact as well. So to make it easier, yeah, for them.
you mentioned it, and I think I agree. I'm not an expert, of course, but you say these life cycle assessments, they are very complex because you need a lot of metrics and a lot of methods and a lot of scientific, let's say, calculation methods and to combine all of that. Because if I think of chicken meat, how you come into the process of producing chicken meat, there's a lot of parameters that need to be integrated. How can you because if you automate everything, and I understand that it's a necessity if we want to make this, let's say, if we want to make this a standard, and also with this CSRDs, if you want to have reporting on a regular base, you cannot rely on humans doing all of this by themselves. So you need software to address this. But how can you guarantee that let's say the outcome of what anybody would calculate as an environmental impact that is according to the standards? Are there organizations that validate these methods? Because I mean, you're gonna say, okay, but the way I calculate, yeah, sure, that's correct. But is that somehow, somewhere also validated by independent players?
Yeah, I mean, good question, Karel. I mean, first of all, I think that if you take Opteinics, if you take other software, if you do it yourself, you will get different results of your carbon footprint. So you will never ever, well, that will be the dream, my dream. If I do the carbon footprint of meat and you do it, if we get the same number, it's like, oh my God, like that would be that should be, of course, the ultimate goal. But there are many assumptions, as you said, assumptions, data. I mean, the important thing is that you always use the same methodology, the same tool for your benchmarking, for your scenarios. Okay, so that it's comparable. Having said that, the LCA methodology, so to say, that can be certified. So that must be externally certified. So at Opteinics, we are working with our partner to certify the methodology, so externally certified. So our customers can be sure that the algorithms will calculate according to the standards. And of course, the missing piece is the results, right? They enter the data, so then they will need to certify themselves this last part. So with the certifier, would check their input data and will validate that that's correct. Like okay, we had a customer that was saying that the final weight of the chicken, instead of 2 kilo, the customer wrote, okay, 2 tons, right? So 2,000 kilo. So then, right, they were reporting that as a bug, right? And it's like, okay, that looks very weird. And then when we looked at the data, it's like, okay, you have a 2-ton chicken. So the certifier, right, will check that.
You can solve other problems with 2-ton chickens, eh?
Maybe let's see in future what do we have, but that was of course we cannot ensure that the data that the user is entering is correct, right? So we have a lot of validations and so on, but at the end that needs to be validated as well.
Okay, no. Good.
Right. Maybe a last topic, because we are almost at the end of this podcast. I said in the beginning, let's not focus on the other parameters of sustainability, but I'm sometimes thinking, there is a factor of well-being, animal well-being, as well. And then, for example, if you compare free range with barns, I can imagine that maybe the other one is more on the environmental than more sustainable. But for the animal, is it always in sync? I can imagine sometimes it's not. And what do you choose then?
Yes. So, I mean, at the end, there are different industrial practices, right? And at the end, the trend from the consumer is that we are buying more, let's say, free-range chickens, right? And then, of course, there is this idea that, okay, like free-range chickens, they're more sustainable, right? They are more sustainable for sure when you look at the ethical practices and when you look at the well-being
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that when we look at the environmental dimension, that's not more sustainable, right? So the carbon footprint of a free range chicken, that's higher because the chickens basically they move more, so they need to eat more, so more feed is consumed. There is more feed loss outside in the fields. So that's the trade-off, right? What we talked
Yeah.
about before with environmental categories. This is also the case
Also
when we
true.
look at especially animals, right? So, but the trend is clear, at least in Europe, right? Globally, I cannot say the same, but in Europe, the trend is clear that consumers buy more free range bio products, especially when it comes to animal products. So having that in mind, then I mean the trend will be like, okay, we buy more free range or bio products which have a higher environmental
Yeah.
footprint. But then, I mean, these
You can
companies,
still.
I mean, at the end, it's the same approach. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
free range chicken. Okay, calculate your footprint, and then how can you reduce it?
Yeah.
So it's
Indeed.
always whatever
Mhm.
your practices are, you need to reduce, right? So
Yeah.
And in the end, it's like we said in the beginning as well. If the consumer is willing to pay a bit more for a more sustainable, let's say, taking into consideration the well-being of the animal
Yeah.
more product, yeah, then that's what's going to happen. And again, yeah, it's where you start from. So also, I think even in free range, yeah, if the trend and if the politics is we need to go carbon neutral, then also in free range that will be the incentive.
right.
It will be with other measures. Other measures will need to be taken, and other initiatives probably are needed to get that footprint down. But it will need to be done anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And let's end with looking to the future. How do you see the future? Is it bright? Do we look from a positive side?
Mixed feelings, no, but so I think I mean what I see right in the feed food value chain, that's an increasing demand in for the sustainability assessment. So as I said, I really like to see all kind of sustainability positions, open. It's like great, so they know that this is important. They know that this is critical. I know that it's mainly because of costs or regulations. So that's how it is, but that's also
Yeah.
fine. And I think for me the future is really to have I mean that any step, that they take, that's a step taken in the right direction. So I mean, if it's free range or whatever, it's like you need to reduce, right? As
Yeah.
Karin said,
True.
it's other measurements, other initiatives, but that's the trend. And for me, there are two critical areas, right, that every company needs or will need to do this sustainability journey. One is metrics, right? We talked about that. That's
Yeah.
essential. You need data points. And the other one is collaboration along the supply chain. So we also extensively talked about that, that you cannot do it alone
True.
unless you own the whole value chain. Okay, but some cases,
But
few cases. But collaboration is key. Collaboration, I mean, along the supply chain, collaboration with software, right? Partnerships.
Yeah.
So collaboration is key. Yeah.
I think I see the same trend. If you look to the journey that our company and our partnership has taken us over the last couple of years, then I think that if you see where we started off and the impact we had then on our industry, which is the feed food, pet food, aqua industry, let's say, and if you see at the initiatives that are taken today and the initiatives that we see from our customers today on sustainability and the impact that we although still limited, but the impact that we can already have with what we do on improving the global environmental impact of the agri-food industry, then okay, I'm also positive, and I would like to invite the audience that if they're not yet in a stage where they were talking about it, then I would kindly we invite them to another podcast where we can discuss where we can discuss with them possibilities and opportunities, because I think there's still a lot of room for improvement, and with the targets that are set, we still have quite some work ahead of us. But yeah, I think I like to think of the glass half full instead of half empty. So
Yeah, for sure.
it's not full yet, but it's half full.
Well, I still remember my first working day, in fact, because I'm also an environmental engineer. And then I noticed there are some areas of reach, because then it was still called reach, and that was in chemicals, but you also had environmental things, and like very small bits inside the application. I was like, okay, I'm in the IT, but there's still a piece of environmental things in there. And if I now look, I think we can be proud as software suppliers that we put as much as possible focus on it, because if we don't do this type of collaboration is needed. So it's not only to the producing companies that they need to think of, also we need to think of. And the more we collaborate together as an industry, I think the bigger the effect can be and the faster. So I look also from a positive side to the future. So I want to thank you. Thank you, Irene. It was very insightful. I hoped it would be, and it was. I hope the audience also liked it. Thank you, Karel, as well, for the extra addings in this podcast. And maybe for the audience, I want to put a question out there in the sense of, like Karel, you initiated already. That type of question that I'm thinking of, what kind of steps will you take in this area, in the sustainability, also for your organization? And if there is something that we could help, or even Opteinics, feel free to contact us. We're always open for a conversation to see how we can collaborate and work together on this. So thank you, and looking forward to see you in a next episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.